You know what? For the price, this little lens is far better than it should be. Today we are looking at the Viltrox 20mm 2.8 lens for the Sony E-mount system. A surprisingly good little lens that is incredibly affordable. So what makes this little lens so special? Well, first off is obviously its size. It is absolutely tiny and is extremely lightweight as well. So actually when you're shooting with this on the front of your camera, it really feels like absolutely nothing. I think this is probably the closest you're ever going to get to a APS-C size sensor system or something like a Fuji system on a Sony full frame setup. If you want a very lightweight small lens, then this is certainly a great option to go for. On the front of the camera, it barely sticks out beyond the actual hand grip on the side, so packing it into a bag or just carrying it around is incredibly easy. Its other, of course, USP is that it's just incredibly cheap. Here in the UK, I think it's about £170, and to be honest, you can't get many things for that sort of price nowadays, especially a lens that you can use full frame, which is, once again, very impressive. There are some cheaper lenses out there that are fully manual, but when it comes to autofocus, this is one of the cheapest that has ever been released. Now, with the price being so low, there surely must be some compromises. After all, it can't be built like a tank, like much more expensive lenses, and that's true. It is made of plastic, however, despite that, it feels pretty solid. It does have a metal mount on the back, so it's good to see that there's not going to be any flex or concern over there. The focus ring, even though it's made of plastic, actually feels quite nice to move around. It's quite large, which is impressive to see on such a small lens. The lens hood is plasticky, but no worse than any other lens hood from other manufacturers, and fits on very nicely on the front without taking up any sort of space. Of course, you're not getting anything like weather sealing or stuff like that, but what do you expect? It's an ultra cheap lens. And the positives don't really just end with the build quality either. The image quality, well, that is also quite impressive considering the price bracket that this lens is in. I think the days of bad lens and optics that are out there are kind of behind us. You're not really compromising like you did in the past, and even if there are some compromises, it's kind of fun to have different lenses that can give you different looks. Now, I'm not going to absolutely pixel peep in this video. There are other people out there on YouTube that can do far better than I can. But as you can see from these examples, it all looks quite impressive. The center of sharpness is more than good enough, and okay, maybe there's some fall off around the edges, but it still looks great when especially just using it on something like social media. And actually having some lens characteristics can be quite nice. It just gives something a bit of a unique look. And when you're not spending too much money, it is actually quite fun just to have those different looks to play around with. Autofocus has been very impressive. I've seen no issues with it whatsoever. It is wide angle, so of course it's not going to have a big problem as most things are in focus most of the time, but it seems to lock on just as well as any of my other E-mount lenses. Close focusing is also quite impressive, as you can see here. I can easily get some nice product shots just using my FX3 and this 20mm lens. So what is the competition to this lens? Well, there are other 20mm lenses out there. Most of them are far more expensive. Of course, you could go for a 16-35 or a zoom like the Sigma 16-28. That lens is obviously a lot more expensive, but is going to give you a bit more range. In terms of build quality, it's not too far different, to be honest, into both of them having quite a plasticky feel, maybe the Sigma being slightly better. The nearest lens to this is probably the Tamron 20mm 2.8, another full frame option for E-mount, and it is also very tiny, very similar size to this, but it is almost twice the price, and you have to wonder, is it really worth that big of a price jump? Now, I've never used that lens, so I can't really give a full kind of review compared answer, but to be honest, with the results I can see out of the Viltrox, I'm struggling to see why you would then spend so much more for the Tamron. So who is this lens for? Well, I think because of the 20mm, it makes a lot of sense for vloggers. Vloggers generally want to be able to hold their camera not too far from their face, and I think anything longer than 20mm can be a bit of a struggle to use. But what's nice about 20mm compared to say 16 is you're not going to get as much distortion. Okay, you're not going to see as much around the frame, but when you've got things like the image stabilization going and everything like that, it can look a lot nicer when slightly more cropped in with a 20 over something like a 16. I also think this is a great option if you want to experiment with landscape photography or filmmaking. Maybe it's not something you do all the time and it's not a regular thing, and investing in a wide angle lens perhaps isn't really high on your priorities. You've got your 24-70 and it does the job for all your main purposes and needs. And you know, the idea of spending another £600-700 at least on a more expensive lens just isn't really worth it for the occasional use of that wide angle. Well, with how affordable this is, I think it's worth picking up and just experimenting with that sort of photography. I also think this would be a great vacation lens as well. It is so lightweight and so small, it's just easy to carry with you anywhere you go. It's going to be a very unique lens to use in certain situations. It's very wide angle, of course, for a lot of shooting that you might do, but actually that's quite nice. And with its tiny size and easy portability and so little weight to be carrying around either in your hand or in your bag, it could be a no-brainer for that sort of shooting. Finally, for the pros out there, this could be a great backup lens. Even if you have more expensive, more impressive lenses in your kit bag, but perhaps you just think, oh, maybe I need a backup option just in case anything ever went wrong with one of those lenses. I can imagine if you're a landscape photographer and you're doing a lot of hiking or maybe away from in a remote location for a long period of time, the idea that if anything were to go wrong with your lens, which to be honest, when you're out in the wild like that is quite likely, then having a little lightweight backup so you can still get those shots is not a bad idea. For me personally, that is probably the main reason I will be using this lens. It's so small and lightweight, I can keep it in the camera bag without really noticing it. But if there is ever an issue with our main lenses, then it's good to know that I've got this thing with me. Now, Viltrox have announced a 40mm version of this lens as well, which I'm very intrigued by, and it's quite cool if they're going to be bringing out this sort of miniature prime set at such an affordable price. It could really open up a whole new world of photography, and that's before we even start talking about how you could use this lens on smaller cameras and even on APS-C size cameras where it's going to give you an equivalent focal length of something like a 35. If you like the sound of this lens, then make sure you use the link below to pick one up, as it massively helps the channel, and also please like and subscribe as well, as it also really does help us out. If you've enjoyed this video, then why not check out my other lens reviews, such as this one of the Sigma 24-70, the lens that I think everyone should own.